Thanks, David.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Stephen. Before we formally introduce our speaker today, I just wanted to introduce to you the James Macaulay Creative Fellow. So our speaker is the 2024 winner of the Macaulay Creative Fellowship. It was established in 2023, so Kirsten is the second recipient. For those of you who don't know, James Macaulay was a distinguished Australian poet. He was also the head of English here at the university from 1961 and made amazing contributions not only to writing in Australia but to the arts more broadly in Tasmania. And the fellowship was established after a number of memorial lectures that ran through the 70s, 80s and 90s by a range of donors and patrons to honour and to reward ongoing creative talent across Australia. The idea of the fellowship is open to multi-art forms. This year it's a visual artist. And the established artist applies formally to a panel and selected on the quality of their work. The fellowship includes a residency, so located here within the School of Creative Arts and Media, connecting to community, to students in a range of different capacities, including workshops, talks, and just general engagement. And the idea is that the fellow will also have an ongoing connection with the school and various parts of our community. So it's fantastic to have Kirsten here today. I'll hand back to Stephen, who will formally introduce her.
Thanks, Meg. Come with me. So as we get started today with the Art Forum, it's my pleasure to introduce Kirsten Coelho to you all. I'd like to welcome the members of the Tasmanian Ceramics Association who have been very excited and who are sort of showing great presence here today. Thank you. Kirsten joins us from Adelaide and has been working in the ceramic studio here at Hunter Street for a very short time. She's been experimenting on some new ideas and forms, as well as conducting some demonstrations and individual tutorials for students here at Hunter Street in the ceramic studio and also in the north at Inveresk. Kirsten's creative practice began with her study for the Bachelor of Design, majoring in ceramics at University of South Australia in 1988, which is when she completed that degree. Following her undergraduate degree in Adelaide, Kirsten moved to Sydney to establish her creative practice working in the pottery studio with Warren Morfitt. It was at this time she commenced teaching alongside of her ceramics practice, and Kirsten has been a dedicated and long-standing educator in diverse roles in university, community and private teaching roles within Australia and the United Kingdom. Kirsten worked for almost 10 years in London, having moved there in 1990 and remaining until 1999. She commenced a master's degree at University of South Australia in 2000 and completed in 2004. Kirsten's completed works for more than 20 solo shows in Australia and also in Singapore, but over 110 curated group exhibitions within Australia, Hong Kong, the Netherlands, Taiwan, New Zealand, USA and the UK. Her works represented in numerous collections within Australia, including the National Gallery of Australia, the Gallery of Modern Art in Queensland, State Galleries of New South Wales, South Australia and Western Australia, and that's a very small selection of the public collections her works found within. Kirsten was awarded the City of Hobart Art Prize in 2015, the Sidney Meyer International Ceramic Award in 2010, and the Josephine Ulrich Ceramic Art Award for Excellence in 2003. Since she graduated in 1988 from that undergraduate degree, she's been rather busy. It's my great honour to introduce our esteemed guest, Kirsten Coelho, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much, Stephen. That almost makes me want to start crying, which I do very easily, so forewarned. I'm just so thrilled and honoured to be here, and very, very grateful to the James Macaulay Fellowship and also to the University of Tasmania and this art school of creative arts and media and design. I'd really like to thank Meg Keating and Greg Marshall for hosting me here. I'd also really like to thank Stephen Carson and Kirsty Riddle and all the students in the ceramic studio for making me feel so welcome here in the art school. This has really been a very exciting few weeks for me, and as I was just saying to Meg, it's been speeding by way too quickly, which I didn't anticipate that before I came, and I feel like I just want to stay here for ages. You might find me hiding out in ceramics and I haven't left. And also thank you to Neil for organising this talk today. Anyway, I have got probably a few too many images, but I shall try not to overwhelm. So I'm starting with a new work. This is really, really new, and I'm going to end with new work, and then there's a whole lot of kind of things in between. So this piece here is called Elegy for 12 Maidens, and I was just recently invited to be in a group ceramic exhibition held at the Chalchak Wing Museum in Sydney, and it was a really fantastic project. Really exciting for an artist because we were invited to look at the incredible collection that's housed within that museum, and then invited to make work in response to the collection and then exhibit the work. So, sorry, I've just dropped my glasses. We had a whole week where we could look in drawers and drawers and drawers of archaeology, but also walk through departments of science equipment, old cameras, just biological specimens, just all kinds of things. It was really incredible. And I was really transfixed by these shards. Oh, sorry. I was very, very transfixed by these shards. They, you know, I mean, the title of this talk even is Creating Narrative, and I tend to create a narrative through my work by placing objects together. But here is, you know, 5th century BC narrative created on the surface of a vessel, all painted by hand, and just utterly exquisite, really quite mind-blowing, the skill of the potter. I think the other thing that really struck me in the museum, which I hadn't anticipated actually, like I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to go there, I'm going to look at some objects, and then I'm going to make something in response to those objects. But what stood out to me profoundly was the care of the objects, the way the archaeologists and the curators and the staff of the museum cared about every single object and about preserving the history through material, through objects. And I became really kind of obsessed almost by the materials of preservation, the white ribbons, the white fabric that went over objects. You know, one of the curators showed me a beautiful book, and it was in its own cardboard box. It was wrapped in paper beautifully, and each thing is preserved in this way. It's really remarkable. Yeah, so here, and then, you know, I started to think about this, you know, the sculptural kind of properties of preservation, you know, of these, not just the artefacts themselves. But I did, of course, look at a lot of objects and become very inspired by the objects. And this is part of what the exhibition looked like in the end. So here you can see Glenn Barclay's work in the far corner, and Vipul Srivastava and Jugs Kitson, who you're probably familiar with. And this is Idil Ibrahimi. Idil was inspired by strands and strands of white beads made from shells. And Idil is from Somalia. And so Idil went home and made 10,000 ceramic beads and then made this vessel out of all those beads. It's a very beautiful, quite remarkable work. And it was the first time for me that I started to do something on paper and put it in an exhibition. It was quite a nerve-wracking process because I usually only show ceramic things. But I really wanted to find a way to bring in those white ribbons and talk about the care of the objects. But I was also talking about a story called the Penelopead, which is by Margaret Atwood. And it's Margaret Atwood's take on part of the Odyssey, where Odysseus comes back and doesn't trust the handmaidens of Penelope and kills them. It's a terrible story. But I wanted to find a way to talk about that. And that's why that original, the ceramic work in the first image is called Elegy for 12 Maidens, because he kills the 12 maidens of Penelope. And then, I don't know if you all find this, but it's weird how you can be working on something and it will relate back to something else that you might have seen maybe even 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And I was doing those works on paper and then I realised it just absolutely connected to, this is a wall in Herculaneum just outside of Naples, and it's, it's a frescoed wall, preserved, hundreds of years old, and I felt like there was incredible connection between what I was trying to do there and then this photo I'd taken 6 years ago. Okay, so, the abrupt change. As Stephen mentioned, I finished art school in 1988, and in 1988, the emphasis when I was at art school was a lot about really bright colours and Memphis design. Some of you may remember the designer Ettore Sostas, hugely influential designer. And I had started art school. I knew I wanted to do ceramics, but I had this crazy plan that I was going to make furniture out of clay, which any of you working with clay would know that's completely ridiculous and very unrealistic. And I was just saying the other day to some students that I made a big table which was partly out of clay and partly out of cement, and when it rained, it was at my friend's house, it literally sunk into the backyard. And then I became really worried that my furniture was going to kill someone. And so I thought, okay, end of that. But I then, just became really interested in, I guess, going back to like those Greek shards, painting a narrative on a thrown vessel. In South Australia, we have a really a rich history of people working in that way. Peter Johnson and Jerry Wedd, for example. But also throughout Australia at that time, this is the work of Stephen Benwell, who many of you would be familiar with his work. And I wish also that I had a slide of Patsy Healy's work, because her work is always fantastic and was always a real beacon for me. Anyway, this is what I came up with when I left art school and I moved to England, and it was a way for me to build my skills with the wheel, but also try and earn money. So I used to throw things during the week, I would paint them, and then on the weekends in London, I would do markets and sell these pieces. So I was a really, really terrible thrower when I left art school, and at first I think people bought things just to hold their doors open, or they were very, very heavy things. But after a while of living in the UK and being surrounded by other types of ceramic traditions, I started to really change my focus and felt like I really wanted to change my work. And being in the UK for all that time allowed me to visit a lot of museum collections. This is from the Jeffire Museum, and it's a watering can from the 16th century, and it was used to sprinkle water on the floor because a lot of floors were mud or dirt, and it was to keep the dust down. But I love it. I think it's just such a fabulously sculptural object. Also was the Percival David collection, which is now in the British Museum. This is a Korean moon jar, which is also in the British Museum. And this is Temuku teapot by Shoji Hamada. So, I mean, yeah, I think like seeing all these different collections and seeing all these different types of vessels with all these different types of surfaces made me really want to explore more how material in itself can communicate without painting something on the surface, just letting the material speak. This man who sadly died last year is Richard Batterham, and he worked at the Leach Pottery. And I felt like he was a real exemplar of this idea of the truth. I guess, you know, to quote Bernard, let the truth to material. But there's just a wonderful expressivity in his work. And if you can think about the pot as an abstract object, you know, then I think it's beautifully encapsulated in the work of Richard Batterham. But of course, of huge influence is Lucy Ree, who was a Viennese potter who lived in the UK, and that's her work. And this is a dingware Chinese vessel, which I think, you know, the first time I saw a vessel like this, somehow it really spoke to me, this sort of juxtaposition between the metal on the rim and the porcelain. Yeah, so I moved back to Australia, as Stephen mentioned, in 1999, and then I was very lucky to have a studio in the Jam Factory. And the Jam Factory was fantastic because it was like a multi-tiered peer and mentor environment. So you had people who had just left art school, but you also had people working near you who'd left art school 40 years ago. And so if you ever had a problem or if you wanted to know some new information, there was always someone you could ask. It was just such an incredible environment. And I worked there for 2 years, and it was, this was the head of the studio, Stephen Bowers. This is his work when I first went there. It was just a fantastic way for me to be able to change my work. I learned a lot about working with porcelain, which I'd started to use in the UK, but didn't have access to a gas kiln. So when I went to the Jam Factory, I learned about gas firing, about porcelains, and lots of different ways of working. And I don't think I would have been able to learn all of that so thoroughly without the assistance of the Jam Factory. Also, at the same time, I undertook a postgraduate degree because I really wanted to investigate more this kind of abstract potential of the vessel, or how a vessel can be a metaphor for something else. And I guess, you know, it was the beginning of slowly trying to build a way of, you know, where my work is now, where it's vessels together trying to create a story or tell a story. This is Gabriella Roscoe, and I just thought it's just so simple, fabulously simple as a vessel. Lucio Fontana. And this is a vessel from the Momoyama period in Japan, which is like 17th century, I think. And again, just incredible abstraction and power within a ceramic object. And then I thought, well, you know, that's all very well to look at things from other cultures, but, you know, I need to reference also what's my experience, what's around me. And so I started to look more. I live in a very kind of old, rundown part of Adelaide, Port Adelaide, and started to look a lot more to the kind of urban decay, I guess. So these are some of the pieces from that time, and then moving on a bit later. I wanted to pause here to talk about two amazing mentors that I've had. The man on the left is Kai Lu, and the person on the right is Gwyn Hanson-Piggott, and I look stupidly tall in the middle between these two people. But yeah, I think we all have people in our life. It might be your aunt, it might be your sister's friend, or, you know, another maker, or someone that you've met who just gives you guidance, helps you, looks after you, gives you great advice. These two people have been absolutely huge in my life. Sadly, both of them are no longer here, but I'm very grateful to them both. Kai Lu and I were friends for a very long time, and Kai would always invite all the people he knew and try and help them in some way and publicise their work or be an advocate for artists. And so I was lucky to do different projects with Kai. This is Kai Lu, one of Kai Lu's pieces. This is a sunflower chair. I've sat in it once. I was so nervous. So we did a project with Kai Lu, 6 other artists and Kai, called the Collectors Project. Sorry about the images. This is Julie Blyfield with Kai Lu, Bruce Nusky with Kai Lu. And this, of course, many of you will be familiar with the beautiful work of Gwyn Hanson-Piggott. This is my own work. So, yeah, I guess around that time, which is like 2011, 2012, you know, I'm starting to think more and more about the idea of the group of objects, the still life, the vignette, however you want to call it. This is an English artist who lives in America called Andrew Lord. And these are from the late 1990s, these works. Yeah, again, this just fabulous kind of power of objects and power of objects together. This is his work as well. Chinese, Ming. These are a set of photographs by Cy Twombly, which, you know, many of you would probably be familiar with his painting, but he was also an incredible sculptor and incredible photographer. And I started to look more and more at painting as well. This is Chardin. This is my brother, aged about 8. When we were young, and I think this again, it goes back to this thing of, you know, things that happen at some point in your life come back to you again in another part of your life. And I remember my brother and I and my mother went to Sovereign Hill near Ballarat when we were kids. And it really stayed with me. And then I went back there as an adult. But what struck me when I went back as an adult and walking around a living museum in a way, which is, a little bit, I mean, okay, it's a bit twee or whatever, but there was some story there also about culture and cultures coming together and social history. And I became really interested in that. And I know it's through a kind of strange way of Sovereign Hill, but it actually had a big influence on my work for a long time afterwards. Stephen mentioned that in 2012 I was fortunate to be the recipient of the Sydney Myer Award. As part of that award, you had to tell a story through your work and envisage how you would exhibit that. And I wanted to tell the story of mining in that area and just the hardship of people in that area at that time. Yeah, this is Sovereign Hill. And these are some of the pieces from that. And Kailua very generously made me the furniture that I could show my work on. So moving ahead a bit, I was also lucky to have a residency at the Tweed Regional Gallery where there's the Margaret Olley Centre. Part of that residency is that you can engage either with landscape or with the Margaret Olley collection or something else within the gallery. I don't know if any of you have ever been there, but it's quite profound in the way that they have recreated right down to cigarette butts Margaret Olley's entire studio. And so as part of the residency, I could be inside the studio. Like normally you can just stand outside and look in. But I was able to kind of wander amongst all of Margaret Olley's objects. And I found it very profound, actually. It made me really miss my mum. My mum had passed away when I was quite young. And I think, just that elderly, older woman and all of her things, that it just kind of had a sense of grief to it. But also the privilege of being able to see an archive of an incredible artist like Margaret Olley. It was a very moving residency. This is part of the recreation. And so I was like pulling out the objects and making my own kind of still life groups of objects. And it's amazing to think like that Margaret Olley had all these objects and she's painted them in her way, and then I'm looking at them in a different way. And on the very last day, I thought, I feel like there's some object in this room that I just haven't seen yet that's, I think I just need to have another look around. And so I walked around, and then behind sort of like a postcard was this cup with the owl on it. That's called a skyphus cup, and it's from the 5th century BC. And it's really that cup that has now like led me on this, almost like 10-year journey about Greek mythology and Greek history and ceramics, and creating a sort of underlying narrative through that. And again, these things can happen in really unexpected ways, can't they? That you just happen upon one thing and it can drive so much work. And also, this the white objects all together. In 2018, I was invited to be part of the Adelaide Biennial of Art that was created by Erica Green. It was called Divided Worlds. And my work was called Transfigured Night. It was 73 pieces in porcelain on a 14-metre plinth inside the Jampat tree. And I showed that image before, the painting of the woman that's by Russell Drysdale. And I really wanted to make something that talked about women in the landscape. It was kind of a little bit based on The Drover's Wife, and I was very struck by, I think that story has problems for, many reasons, but what I was drawn to was the story of the woman who's alone in her home. There's a snake in the wall of the house. She's got her children. She's putting them on top of the table. She's waiting for the snake to come out, and it comes out in the morning. And I think I'm quite an anxious person, and I don't know if, maybe some of you are the same, that you wake up in the middle of the night and you're really anxious, but then when you wake up in the morning, things are sort of okay again. And that's why I really liked that title, Transfigured Night, because I thought it's like a shifting change throughout the night. And that's why I wanted this sort of directional lighting to sort of, like the light is sort of coming into your home and building, throughout the night until you have the morning. I was so lucky in this biennial to work with the Jam Factory, Sam Stagg Museum, Erica Green, and Jeff Cobham, who did the lighting. It's just amazing if you can work with lots of different people to realise some idea and see it come to fruition. In 2019, I received a fellowship from Art South Australia to research archaeology and Greek and Roman history. So this is at the Parthenon in Athens. Acropolis. And some of the work. So in 2020, this is kind of a resulting work from that. This is called Ithaca. This is 40 pieces. And that's it displayed in the Sam Stagg Museum in Adelaide. The plinth was really quite big, and I wanted it to look sort of like alabaster. So Joanna Kitto, who was working at Sam Stagg at the time, found a Viennese plasterer to plaster the whole plinth, and it was really lovely. But then we moved the plinth to Sydney, and that was a really big job. It was very heavy. Of course, I've always been very inspired by the painting of Morandi. And this is an English painter, William Scott. So more recently, I've become more drawn to trying to incorporate another kind of colour element into the groups of my work. And I think even extending again from the Margaret Olley residency, and there was all that blue and white pottery, like the willow pattern. And I think ceramics has such a long history of blue and white that I was trying to find a way of incorporating and talking about that history without actually literally painting, a cobalt onto my work, although that's one of the things I want to do while I'm here. And then last year, I just began to think a lot about using terracotta in conjunction with porcelain or in opposition to porcelain. I think terracotta is a really, really beautiful clay that has a power all in its own and has a narrative all in its own, in the same way that porcelain does. They have really long histories, those clays. And as you can see in this painting, 1627, there's the porcelain and the terracotta together. This is Juan de Zuberan, similar idea of the vessels together. And these are just my, very first kind of thinking about how I'm putting those clays together. And this is just, again, I think further trying to refine these ideas of kind of architecture and the domestic space together. This is a really crazy object that I made last year. I'm not sure where that's going. This is me in my studio. My studio's at home in my backyard. And I fire all my things in this gas kiln, which is getting pretty old, but it's very, very reliable. And I'm about to have an exhibition at Philip Bacon Gallery in Brisbane, and this work are part of that exhibition. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kirsten. This is the opportunity where we all get to ask questions, and I'm reserving the first question, but it's on behalf of many of the people that I feel I kind of represent here, the students. And it's I guess, preceded by the fact that when I was a student, there was a very, very famous Australian artist who came to speak at the art school that I went to. And students really wanted to know how you take a leap from an undergraduate degree to a practice. That artist, whose practices continue to expand into the international realm, really dismissed the question. And I know that we won't have that from Kirsten because she's not that kind of person. They said, well, I didn't get anything out of art school. I just spent the time smoking dope up behind the sheds at Queensland College of Art. So, Kirsten, the question that I've got is, when was that point that we all know that an undergraduate degree gives you so many different skills that we apply in creative, imaginative, flexible ways to establish a career? But when was the point, and how did you get to the point where you absolutely knew that you were not going to work in hospitality and do a little bit of pottery on the side, that you were absolutely launching into a professional practice as an artist? Like, what was that?
That's a great question. Thank you, Stephen. I'd like to answer it in like two ways. If I could. Firstly, I'd like to say that when I was at art school, I loved being at art school because I felt like I'd found finally the people that were a bit like me, you know, and I think I'd been in high school and felt a bit awkward, and not to say I didn't feel awkward at art school, but I found other awkward people, I guess. So there was that. But I think when I was at art school, I didn't really understand what it was to be an artist. Like, what does it mean to be a professional artist? I just kept making things and understood that there was something deep inside of me that was solved or fulfilled by the imperative to make. And every time I've tried to think, oh no, I'm not gonna do that, then it just doesn't feel right. So it's quite a deep feeling in me, that imperative to make something. But there was a point in my life where I was living in England, and I thought, okay, well, yeah, I could. I was working in hospitality, and and I was doing a bit of part-time teaching. Maybe that's where I'm gonna go. And my husband said to me, and it was hard. It was a very hard conversation, and I don't even know if he was my husband yet, actually. But he said to me, what are you going to do? Like, you seem to do a bit of this, you seem to do a bit of that. What are you going to do? Because if you're going to do it, do it. If you're not going to do it, don't do it. And it was very confronting conversation, but it actually really made me go, well, no, I'm going to do it. And I don't know if that's, something in me or was something about reacting to you. But it's made me very determined, and I'm very, very grateful for that moment because it helped to clarify in me what it was I really wanted. And it wasn't wanted like a desire, it was wanted because it's what I need to do for me to feel okay. And in that moment, that's what I understood. Does that make sense?
That makes sense, thank you. So we can now open up to the floor. I get the opportunity to talk to Kirsten most days that she's here. So who would like to ask a question or make a comment?
might just walk over to you with a microphone for our online audience, if that's okay.
I just wanted to ask you about the practicalities of working in the studio, and how much time do you spend on like writing about your practice? Like, what sort of balance do you have with that?
That's a really good question because, if you ever have an exhibition or there's any kind of presentation of your work, you always have to write about your work. You have to write a statement. You have to come up with titles of your work with lots of different elements. But I would say that that kind of engagement with my work happens on the way to the work being finished. But most of the time I'm making my work. That takes up most of the, I mean, that's 80% of the time is making my work and all the processes, as those of you who work with ceramics will know, here today know, ceramics is so process driven and takes a long time to make your work. But all those other parts are very important and they do take up a lot of time, but they are an integral part of an art practice and more so. So it's a really good question. Yeah.
For those of you joining us via Zoom, I also have my laptop open. You're welcome to drop a message into the chat, or indeed folks up at Inveresk, please do chip in if you have a question. Ron.
Thank you. I'll fill the void. Kirsten, thanks so much. Really amazing to, I've actually never sat in a talk of yours and, been taken through, processes and, points of reference and contextual references that have been so influential and informative. And so to my question, it kind of extends on Stephen's initial one. And it's, there's one thing about the school, the kickoff, and where you begin. And then there's that next layer, and that's, so important to craft practices, which is, kind of a community of practice. And you reside within that and grow up and mature within it. And so I wonder if you could sort of speak to me or us about what those pillars are, the pillars in your community of practice. And you mentioned figures, individuals and institutions and, funding and opportunities and so on. So I just wonder if you might be able to flesh that out. And I asked that question like Stephen with a view to the fact that we're sitting amongst folks who are in an institution where people are studying and beginning to project, in their mind's eye where they might be heading and how they might get there.
Oh, no, thank you, Ron. That's a great question too. Look, I think some of the relationships that you develop while you're at art school are some of the most important in your life as an artist. Many people, not many, but I have friends now that were my friends at art school, and we still support each other in our practices now. I mean, I finished in 1988. That's a long time ago. But also, as I mentioned, through the Jam Factory in South Australia, that institution has provided a core community and support for a lot of artists in South Australia. It would be very different in South Australia without the Jam Factory and its ongoing level of support, because you can leave university and, some of you here who are working in ceramics or glass or wood or metal, it's something to consider for the future, because you can leave university and then you can still go there and work there for 2 or 3 more years, and you're engaged in a different kind of community, but it's still a very supportive and fantastic community. And then I think developing out from there, you have your core friendships. And I think, going back to Stephen's question of, what is it that makes you want to be an artist? Yes, it is this inner kind of propulsion or drive to create things. But it is also an engagement with the broader world, with your community, with the people around you, with materials, with history, with social history, and finding ways to communicate that. And it might be through painting, or it might be through poetry, or through music. There's so many different ways in which you can have that expression, and many different communities that will support you in that, because there's communities that may not support you. And I think you can sometimes feel like you're on the outer edges, and it feels like a bit of a struggle. And sometimes I think at art school you can feel like you're really struggling and it's financially really difficult. But I think, it's your community around you that supports you, and also your own inner drive, because that's the only thing you can actually control, is what's inside you. And, this time at art school is just the most fantastic time to experiment and just be together and thrive off of each other's ideas.
We're at time, and speaking... Oh, sorry, one quick question. Come on then. So it's running up the stairs, tripping over, dropping the microphone.
Thank you so much. It was great to see all the connections. I grew up in Victoria, so I know Sovereign Hill. And as soon as you said that, I was like, that's totally, Sovereign Hill. My question is, so I'm a postgraduate student, practicing artist. I want to talk about play and how you've had so many exhibitions. How important is play to your practice, and maintaining that as a part of idea development as you're going forwards? And again, if you've got that process-driven way of making, how do you incorporate play to formulate new ideas and keep going?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that question. It's so good, because it is so important, because you want to keep trying to develop new ideas, and you can get really stuck or feel like you're stuck. And I feel like that's where it is really fantastic to take yourself out of your environment, and, perhaps go somewhere else for a little while, or go into a different kind of museum, or read a different book, or, I think all of those things are really fantastic ways to generate other ideas. I mean, at the moment in Adelaide, I've been spending, maybe once a fortnight. Sometimes I broke my arm, so there was a bit of a pause, but I was going to my friend Peter's studio because he works in terracotta. And actually I would just sit there and sometimes just make little animals in terracotta, something completely different to everything there. But I just loved doing that. And actually my rehab from when I broke my arm was just making animals out of clay. And I have to say, being here is just, it just feels so, I've said the word profound. I don't want to overuse that, but it is like being here. I've made these big terracotta vessels, and I'm so excited by that, because again, it's just so different to what I have just been working on, and I'm so excited to where that might go. So I think it is really important to have those periods, and maybe it's only once every 3 years or every 2 years. It doesn't have to be every week or anything, that you can step outside and think about your work differently. And I think sometimes you do it when you feel ready to do that, because you might have 10 years where you just want to follow one thread, and that's completely fine too. You don't have to keep reinventing the wheel, There's so many different threads. I mean, I was saying to someone just the other day that you could have this and this, and these are your only 2 ingredients. Well, you've got limitless possibilities with those 2 ingredients, haven't you? So yeah. I think sometimes there's a lot of pressure to change work a lot, and I think sometimes that pressure is a bit unfair.
Okay, folks. Stephen, would you like to wrap up?
Yes, thank you, Neil. Kirsten, thank you so much. Folks, thank you for attending today. It's great to have you here. One of the things that we have noticed over the last short time that Kirsten's been here, Kirsten has been extremely generous with her time with students, and there has been a very significant influence impact of a very short amount of time on our little studio. Some students who Kirsten has just almost magically touched on the shoulder have actually become expert throwers. And it is so exciting to see. Of course, we wish her every success, continued success. We are at a point where there could very well be some remarkable new works coming out of this very short wedge of time that she's been present in the school, and we may very well be witnessing something which is profound. So thank you for the presentation today. Thank you for your generosity with this on behalf of the students and the school, and wish you all the best. Thanks, everyone.